Sunday School teacher, our lesson this coming Sunday, May the 1st, is entitled Redeemed from a Critical Spirit. And we're going to be looking now not any longer at the book of Genesis, but we're going to jump all the way over now to the book of Numbers. We're going to be looking now at chapter 12. And there's some special information now that we kind of keep in mind. Those of us who teach Old Testament, which I did for many years, would date Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in that group somewhere between 2000 and 1700 BC, in the early part of that second millennium. Now we're going to skip all the way to the time of Moses. Most of us would date Moses somewhere between about 1450 and 1250, so several hundred years now are going to pass between the lessons we've just studied now and the lesson that we're going to study this coming Sunday. And we're going to focus now on a rather challenging incident in the life of Moses and his family, his sister Miriam and her brother Aaron. When Moses had led the Hebrew people out of Egypt, he was 80 years of age. He lived in Egypt for 40 years, then lived in the wilderness for about 40 years. He married a woman. Now keep in mind, because this is important to the interpretation of the first verse we're going to look at. He married a shepherd girl named Zipporah, down that he drew the water for out in the wilderness, who was a descendant now of another blood descendant of Abraham named Midian. And so keep in mind now that that shepherd girl, some are going to interpret as the Ethiopian here in this very first verse we're going to look at. But now Moses, the time has escaped now, and Moses and Aaron and Miriam now are going to be leading then the people out. And we read pretty well in the book of Exodus when they came out of Egypt that the people complained about the lack of water and the lack of food and the hardship and everything like this. So we have very often, I've made a list, it's a long list of how often the people complain, but now we come in the lesson this coming Sunday to where Miriam, his sister, and Aaron spoke against Moses and complained against him, and God is going to strike Miriam now with leprosy, which at that day and time was more terrifying than I guess cancer even is today, somewhat equivalent to it today. Cancer was the most terrifying disease, I guess, because you could see the flesh turn white as it died, and there was no known cure for it, and the lepers were ostracized from society. Now, some of you may have seen some of the Hollywood movies showing the leper colony in Ben-Hur, I believe it was, that film. It shows these leper colonies that ostracized, and if you came out to them, you had to have them cry, unclean, unclean, to warn you. You could only get so close to leave food, then you had to back away so many feet for them to come get the food. It was a terrible thing. So, but anyway, this is the story now about the critical attitude that Miriam and Aaron had now toward Moses and the encounter and how things worked out. So it's going to focus now on this fractious spirit now in Moses' family. So we've jumped several hundred years now from the time of Abraham then and Jacob all the way down now to the time then of Moses. All right, with that in mind, let's look first of all. First part of our lesson now focuses on Numbers chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, and here we're told now that Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because he had married. Now look at your Bible, if you will, please. The translation that I'm looking at says that Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. So my translation says Cush or Cushite. Now, if you go back to the story of, in other words, of the flood and Noah's Ark and the three sons, whatnot, and one of those sons, Ham, had a son named Cush, and the word Cush in Hebrew means black. Here in your translation, maybe your translation, it says Ethiopian. Now, in biblical days, the country